Once in a while, a challenging theological question shows up in an unusual, unexpected place. As in Pearls Before Swine cartoon last Saturday. Yeah, there we got it. How about that? Gee. So, here they are. Pig and Rat are in a bar. And Pig says, if there is a God, why does he let all the bad things that happen in the world happen? And Rat says, because he's given us beer. And beer is God's way of apologizing for everything else. Pig says, so alcohol is God's makeup gift. That's the conclusion. Rat adds, not tequila. That's from Satan. Now, what do you bet the cartoonist has a tequila story to tell that's behind that cartoon? I would imagine so. There's almost always a story when Satan shows up, or the devil. For instance, the text today. Jesus is still dripping from his baptism. Baptism where he heard the voice that said, you are my son, my chosen. I am pleased with you. A baptism where the Spirit descended on him, where the Spirit opened him up, where the Spirit was turned loose in him. And so now that same Spirit leads him in the wilderness, not just into to drop him off, but in the wilderness. Now, wilderness is another one of those words to pay attention to. Whenever wilderness is mentioned, think of a time, a place of testing, of forming, of purifying. That's what's going on. So, Jesus is led in the wilderness. He's there for 40 days. And who shows up to administer the tests? The devil, according to Luke. Now, this is one of those biblical stories that is much more theological than historical. It's one we take seriously, but not literally. Like the Hebrews, who wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, we're told, between leaving slavery in Egypt and entering the Promised Land, Jesus spends time in the wilderness himself. Time of testing, of trying, of purifying. For him it's 40 days, for them it's 40 years. For Jesus, he already knows who he is. He heard the voice. So he knows his identity. Now it's shaping it and aiming it, if you will. For the Hebrew people, they don't know who they are. They are being formed in this wilderness time. And how long does that take? How old is our nation? How old is the church? Are we done yet? Are we formed, or do we have to have wilderness times like remedial classes to be reformed or have a reformation, a revival? Yeah. So what are the tests then that Jesus has to take that Luke tells us about? It seems to me that they sort of begin with an external sort of physical thing that moves to an internal and more deeply internal test. So the first test that the devil issues is, if you are God's son, or some translate, since you are God's son, and I like that better. We're not arguing about who you are, but the devil knows. Since you are God's son, and you're hungry, you haven't eaten anything for 40 days, that's a long time, why don't you just speak that stone into a loaf of bread? That's a God thing. God speaks and it happens. It's remade. You can do that. And what would it harm? Nobody's going to miss a rock. There's lots of them. And you're hungry, so you take care of that need, and then you can move on to other things. It could lead to all sorts of good things. So what's the downside of this? Well, I think the connection is to, again, the Exodus. When God's people are in the wilderness being formed, they're hungry. They don't have any food. And they're groaning and moaning and grumbling. And what happens? God God gives manna. There is provision from God to sustain them and keep them going. So this, in part, is about learning to trust that God comes through, that God isn't going to leave you out of the picture, that God takes care of you. Learning trust, that's fundamental in a relationship. So Jesus, as a good Jew, would want to honor that, trusting in God's provision, even though he's hungry. The second test. The devil says to Jesus, after showing him the kingdoms of the world, says, since you are God's son, you should be in charge of things, shouldn't you? I mean, that only makes sense. You're God's son, so you should rule over this world that God has sent you into. So all you have to do is sign on here, put your trust in me, and I'll see that it happens. And you will rule all the kingdoms of the world. You'll be in charge. Now, whether, again, story, the devil's a big liar, so we don't know if this is, there's any truth to this or not. This is just a scheme to get Jesus to lean in. What does this suggest? First, is this Jesus' mission? Is that what he's called to do? We know later on, we hear him quoting Isaiah, and that sermon, the Spirit of God is upon me, and I'm sent to bring good news. I'm not sent to rule the world. So that's the one downside. The other is, what does this say about the nature of these kingdoms and states and nations and empires and politics? To whom do they belong? Do you suppose Luke is making a political statement here about power in the world and what happens to it and what happens to those who get caught up in, especially the Roman Empire? Is Luke not taking a shot at the Romans? All of this belongs to the devil. Rome is going to hell in a handbasket, or maybe a bigger basket, maybe a wheelbarrow. The third test is the even more deeply inward test. The devil says to Jesus, since you are God's son, and you see the temple system, the religious system of your people with clarity, you see that it is a runaway train and it's mowing people down, it's destroying lives, throw yourself in front of the train. Throw yourself off the temple, force God's hand, overthrow this system and take over. Make God act and reveal who you really are, and that will change things, won't it? Accept that. You remember the taunting that comes to Jesus when he's on the cross? What do the leaders, the religious leaders, say after having successfully gotten him turned over to the Romans? What do they say to him? If you are the Son of God, God will save you. If you are really God's Son, save yourself. Come down from the cross now. There's an echo here. What is Luke saying about the religious system that Jesus comes to, in a sense, reform? After Jesus declines all of these offers, after he passes his tests, the devil, we're told, goes away until a better time. But what's the unifying factor in these three temptations or tests? Isn't it making a deal? Isn't it leveraging one thing for something else? Isn't it, Jesus, you've got this, give it over and you'll get that? The devil is a wheeler-dealer. For a limited time only, if you act, you'll get this thing here for only $39.95. And if you act now, I'll throw in 3 of these things over here, whatever they are, apple corer and washing machine, I don't know, whatever. The crazy things that we get enticed into, compelled, playing on our temptability. Make a deal. Leverage what you have for something else. Who is right now doing one heck of a job imitating the devil in that sort of power play and leveraging? If not Vladimir Putin. I mean, not only is he waging war and killing people and destroying his neighboring country, but he's using that destructive force and the threat of worse force, perhaps strategic nuclear weapons, to pressure the Ukrainian leaders and other world leaders into making a deal with him. If you'll just bow down and worship me, if you'll just acknowledge that I am the ruler of this domain, then I'll call off the dogs. And we know Putin is as bad a liar or as good a liar as the devil. Plays the part so well. Can anything be trusted that he says or does? Still, in his defense, which I won't go very far with, Putin is just doing the very extreme version of what our system calls on us to do. We live in a system of trading one thing for another. That's not evil, that's not bad. You work to earn this so you can get that. It only becomes evil when we get sucked into it and we have to have so much more stuff, when we can't even use the stuff we've got, or when I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes, but I'm going to make more still, and I'm going to take advantage of you to get it if I can. That's when it becomes evil. It is not evil in and of itself. And it is self-interested. Even when I'm giving to a good cause, even when I'm putting money in for the church, participating in a mission, giving to somebody who's standing on the corner with a sign, who seems to have nothing, even when I'm doing that, I get something out of that, right? There is enlightened self-interest in this, or sometimes not enlightened. Sometimes we don't even know. And I won't begin to tell you how many times I've heard from people who are angry with church because they're not getting from church what they want. I didn't come to hear that. I came to hear this. This is what I want. And if I don't get this, then I'm going to stop giving. Or I'm not going to come here anymore because I didn't like that message. I'm going to find some place that tells me what I want to hear, that feeds me. Since when is it that you come here to get fed? Don't you come here to participate in community? Feeding is part of it. But sometimes we have to eat the vegetables, right? And the stuff we don't really want, don't really like. What's the diet? Once again, that inner listening, that self-awareness. Why am I doing this? What feels good about this? Or why am I backing away from that? What is in that makes me feel bad? And even when I'm tempted to do the right things, what's in it for me? Why am I doing that? Anthony Walker lives in Port Hope, Ontario. He's a trained EMT. He's known somewhat for his political humor that shows up on social media. I'm not aware of it, familiar with it, but I might have to look. On Monday, he was in eastern Poland. He was waiting for the rest of a group of Canadians who were going to join him, and then they were going to travel on to Kiev to join the fight against the invading Russians. And he was interviewed by Carol Off on As It Happens, a radio program on CBC that's on 10 o'clock at night. That was on Monday night. And she asked him why he's going there. What's your connection to Ukraine? Why are you doing this? Why are you there? He said, I have no connection to Ukraine. I have no family there. I have no friends there. I'm a human being. And they're human beings. And that seems to be connection and reason enough to me. And when I heard that, I mean, I was listening closely anyway, but I just leaned in. Like, well, this sounds about as selfless as it gets. What's in it for him? What's he going to get out of it? Now, he's going to serve as a combat medic, but he figures he'll be pulled into a combat activity, an active soldiering very quickly. So there's no real glory in this that he's going to get out of it. He could get killed very easily. And Carol Off, the host of the show, asked him about that. She said, you could die over there. You could get badly injured, maimed over there in this struggle. You may hurt, kill others. Do you understand really what you're getting into? And he said, I have no illusions. This is not tour of duty, I know that. This whole situation sucks. Everything about it. And I don't really want to be here. Nobody wants to be here. The people that I'm joining, they're all combat vets, served in Afghanistan, Iraq. They don't want to be here either. But the Ukrainians live next door to Russia. They shouldn't be punished for that. That's not their fault. And it would really suck if I shot someone. The Russian soldiers coming here, these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, they have been lied to. They've been told that they're coming to gather information, that they're coming to liberate an oppressed people. They're in a terrible position too, but I tell you, they are in the way of, they endanger the right of the Ukrainian people to live their lives freely like we want to live our lives. They should have that right. And so if they get in the way of that, Russians, whoever they are, I will not hesitate to do what needs to be done. And then Carol asked him about his family. He's married. He has 3 young boys and a father that live in the same area in Port Hope, lives in the same area. He said, I've talked with them. Nobody likes this. My dad understands it. My mom, my wife understands it. I've talked with my boys. And I've had them sit down and watch the video of what's happening in Ukraine, what the Russians are doing, and why I'm going there to try to help stop that. And he said, I think my oldest son understands, kind of. The others, no, they're too young. And he said, I hope to come back alive and well. But if I don't, I hope that someday my sons understand. Jesus, filled with the Spirit, led by the same Spirit in the wilderness, tested by the devil. Jesus, full of the Spirit, the same Spirit that leads him in this wilderness, tested by the devil, we're with him. It's where we are right now. As is Anthony Walker and his wife and his boys and his dad, as are the people of Ukraine, as are the people of Russia, as are the people of the world. It's where we all are right now. It's not where we want to be. It's where we are. God help us all. God help us all. Amen.